All right, go ahead and read your opening script.
The Board of Licensed Dietitian meeting is convening at 9:07 a.m. on Wednesday, April 20th, 2022, at the Health and Licensing Office in Salem by telephone conference call. I will now call roll. Yulia Bragdorf here. Jerry Yocker,
Here.
Simone Gillingham,
Here.
Bert Connell,
Here.
Ross Cagle,
Here.
Sarah Lowe, absent. Members, when you wish to speak, please state your last name for the record. For the record, public members calling into public phone line are asked to email April Fleming at april.dhsoha.state.or.us and provide your first and last name. Public and interested parties' feedback may be heard during the public and interested parties' feedback period if indicated on the agenda. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocols when conducting board business. This meeting is called to order.
All right, good job. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. So if somebody other than Yulia could make a motion to approve the agenda.
Euchre, I move to approve the agenda.
Anybody to second?
Okay,
I
go.
second.
I second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Let's do a call. Bragdorf, aye. Yocker,
Aye.
Gillingham,
Aye.
Connell,
Aye.
Cagle.
Aye.
Motion has been carried.
All right, so now we're on report. So director's report, a bunch of things. So during the short session, the legislation passed Senate Bill 1549, which adds another program to our office. It is the temporary staffing agency. So it'll be the first time that we will start licensing and regulating an actual company versus a profession. So that got added on to us. We don't start licensure until July of next year. So we'll be working on that. That gets us up to 18 boards and programs. We have a new executive assistant. So his name is Derek. Some of you have received emails from him, but he took over Paige's position. So you'll get emails back and forth, correspondence relating to your board positions and whether or not you want to serve and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get into a little detail about that here in a minute too. We open back up to the public starting Monday, May 2nd. We've been shut down for well over 2 years. So the public can only currently come into the office by appointment only for taking a test in order to get a licensure. However, we open back up normal like we were pre-pandemic on the 2nd. So been preparing for that. That'll be exciting. We will not have board meetings in person. We will continue doing them this way on Teams. However, we are working on getting the room retrofitted with more equipment so that if people want to come into the office, board members can come in and have a camera there. And also the public will be able to go there and then they will see what you guys see up on a big, huge screen in the boardroom. I'm trying to get more of that interaction, that face-to-face without having to travel. But that requires some retrofitting for the office in the boardroom and some equipment purchasing. So we'll continue doing it this way, but hopefully get a little bit better to where the public will be able to see you. And then also we are working on another way of using Teams, which is what we're using now, to where the public can log into that, but we have control over to keeping them muted, keeping their cameras off, and so that they're not interrupting. And then if we go into an executive session, figuring out ways of breaking that apart so that they're obviously not a part of that. So lots of changes coming. We'll keep you updated on that. So board membership. So few things. So Bert is graciously continuing to serve until replaced. His term was up in March. And we do have one individual who is interested, Jesse. They need to work on their application. It's a new process now, so you have to work, everything's done through Workday. Working on that, so hopefully that person will get in there and get approved. And then Simone, her term was up in February, And so she's graciously continuing to stay, not be on the board.
Cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. So I don't, where, didn't realize I cut out. So what was the last thing you guys heard?
Simone graciously.
Oh, Simone graciously continued to serve until today. So today will be Simone's last board meeting. We want to thank her, obviously, for all the time and effort she's put in to being on the board. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything to her.
Thank you, Simone. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and to serve with you. It's been really a privilege. Thank you so much for dedicating your time and effort to the board.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you all. It's been an experience, and I have appreciated being kind of one of the only ones down in Southern Oregon to represent. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simone.
That's one of the nice things about doing teams too, is it's easier for individuals all throughout Oregon to be able to participate without having to travel and spend, hours to get to Salem. For your guys' board meetings are usually pretty short. So that's another nice thing. It encourages a lot more people to participate and be willing to be on the board when they don't have to travel to Salem. All right, and then we still do have one vacant public member. So if you have any, it can't be immediate family of anybody who's a licensed dietitian, but it can be it can be a consumer. If you have anybody who might be remotely interested, send them our way. We can kind of explain what it is and what to do, but we're not expecting you to recruit. I'm just saying if you have somebody who's interested. And unless anybody has any questions, I will move on. Okay, so let's go to the licensing and fiscal reports. In your materials, they start on slide 8. So slide 8 just shows licenses that were issued, broken out by fiscal year. And mind you, our fiscal years are a little bit different. They're July 1 through June 30th. And then so quarter 1 is July, August, and September. I know it's confusing, but this just shows the licenses issued, broken out by quarter. Slide 9 shows licenses renewed, whether people renewed online or versus through the mail. So the blue bar is for people who renewed online. That orangish brownish color is for people who did it through the mail. Slide 10 just shows active licenses broken out by age and gender. Again, you do not have to delineate between female or male, which is why there's the other. You can see that this is a very female-dominated profession. And a lot of people between the age of 26 to 49 is the majority of the. You do have 27 females under the age of 25 that are actively licensed, though.
Sylvia,
Yeah.
I'm not receiving your slides.
Okay, well, we'll have April can send you it should be part of your calendar invite. So when you, on the invite, you should have materials, the scripts on how to do the motions, all that stuff, but it should be on your calendar invite. But April can send it to you right now if you want to.
Yeah, please.
Sure, she'll send it to you in a moment. All right, so now I'm looking at slide 11. Slide 11 shows the long-term volume licensing trend. So the first number there, the 988, which is quarter 1 of fiscal year 2020, which would be July, August, and September of 2019. You had an average of 988. Currently, you're at an average of 1,126. So it's a growing profession, which is great. Because we do have some of our boards where the line is going the opposite, where it's slowly going down. You guys are slowly going up, which is fantastic. All right, so now I'm on slide 12. This is the financials. As you can see, the ending balance of 1 year becomes the beginning balance of the next year. We've kind of talked about this before, but all your money stays with you in your separate fund. It does not go to any other board or program. And you guys are doing pretty good. So our goal in the office is to make sure that your revenue expenditures are about the same. We don't want to be bringing in way more revenue than we have expenditures. And you don't want to consistently have more expenditures than revenue, because then all of a sudden you'll go into the negative. So you can see there in fiscal year 2020, there was more expenditures than there was revenue. But that net operations, that shows kind of whether you're plus or minus for the year, which is great. You guys are doing really good. And so, and you also want to have a good cushion, which is the cash ending balance. We want to keep that kind of steady. If for some reason we have a case that goes all the way to a hearing or to a trial, that money will get eaten up really quick. So, but that's what but financially, you guys are looking fabulous. Anybody have any questions on any of those stats? No. All right, let's move on. We are on slide 14 of your materials, and Russ, I know you don't have this, but this is the license or it's the regulatory report. So Bob, you want to explain a little bit what they're about it, and then maybe a little bit more detail, knowing that Russ can't see it.
So this is Bob Boswell for the record, and so as you can see on the slide, it looks different than it has in previous years. Kind of breaks out anywhere from the total number of cases that we have, whether it was a service concern or a licensing concern, and then all the way over to the right, it tells us the complaint came in or who it's from. And currently, we have 2 cases open that we received in this current biennium. Doesn't have the exact date here for me, but it's been within the last year. And we're working on those to try to keep your caseload down and not taking very long to get processed and get them through. And that's about all I have. Any questions or concerns?
This is Gillingham. I was just curious, I know in the past there were the issues with the workforce survey. And from my personal experience, it seems like that's been easier to complete and working well for me. So I'm just wondering if that's continued to be an issue or if that's resolved or improved.
It's improved. For at least a year, maybe even longer now, we haven't had any complaints coming from workforce where licensees were not taking the survey. So it looks like everybody's taking it now. And I think they're kind of, when you renew, I don't get to see what happens when they renew online. But I think it stops them if they don't take it.
Yeah, Bob, this is Ann. We have a direct pass through now. If you have questions about the mechanics of it, Nathan can help. But we set it up so that if somebody goes to renew, it takes them directly to the workforce survey. And when they're done, they are brought directly back. So you can't attest that you take and didn't do it. So that flow has improved that situation.
Therefore, no complaints.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Okay, then let's move on to policy. Ann?
Okay, sure. For the record, this is Ann Thompson, your policy analyst. We have a couple of things that I can talk about today. I can't get into too much detail because about the rollover. I know there was some concern a couple of years ago. We tried to change your CEUs from, you take it 1 year, which you guys do for your national certification, and you get a whole bunch of continuing education units, and then you roll them forward for 4 years. And that's unusual for HLO. And in an effort to standardize it, we tried to move you back to yearly, as you have a yearly authorization through us. And we got a lot of public comment. The licensed dietitians were really passionate about being able to use their national certification CEUs for the state. And because they didn't match, the rollover was very important. We didn't know if your statutes, that the licensed dietitian statutes, would allow us to do that. Because again, you have a yearly authorization. Having CEUs roll and roll, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do that. So we did with the DOJ. I can't get into a lot of details because it is legal advice and we can't do that in the open session. But I can tell you that after a deeper dive, we found out that we could allow the rollover for dietitians. So things are going to stay as they are. So we appreciate the time it took to go over that. But for right now, you guys can continue to use those CEUs acquired for your national certification for a few years afterwards. Do you have any questions on that?
Yes, this is Brogdorf. So if we have, let's say, renewed in 2020 with 75 credits, that would be good till 2025 as far as our board is concerned. Is that how you understand that?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question, Yulia? I'm not sure.
Sure. So if somebody they went to a conference and they got 75 units of continuing education in 2020, they essentially are good to go till 2025. Is that right?
Yes, we would have to see, and Sylvie might have more details, but depending on when your national certification is re-upped and how your licensure year rolls, there might be the edge of one before, it's not like you get out of jail free card. You have to kind of look and say, okay, if I got these on this date, do these credits cover the amount I need for the time I need for the state? Because sometimes your national renewal and your state renewal are going to be a little bit different in a calendar year. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that helps a lot. Thank you. And then does this also apply to the ethics? You can do 5 ethics in one whoosh, or do you still have to do ethics 1 unit every year? How does it go with ethics and cultural and diversity credits?
Oh, are you talking about the cultural competency?
Cultural competency and the ethics, because we required, how does that fit into the rollover?
That's a really interesting question. Let me get my rule book, but it's my understanding that the cultural competency piece of it is because that was created by a different bill. That was 2011, and you have to get 1 hour every other time you renew. So because that's a separate bill, I'm really glad you brought that up before I had to. That is a separate requirement.
Okay.
So as long as you can show, if you're audited, that you have continuing, and the thing about the cultural competency is that the way the bill was written, 2011, you have to get the classes through classes approved by the Oregon Health Authority's Office of Equity and Inclusion. They have a list of courses. And so that's a separate requirement from your national certification. So while your national certification covers your regular CEUs, that cultural competency piece is separate, and you have to make sure you get a course that's approved by the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and you have that every other time you renew your state license. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. The approved, I thought we had a conversation, I could be mistaken, but I thought we had a conversation about this piece a year or so ago or further, about that we can take, doesn't have to be approved course. Our board, I thought, decided we do not need to have it approved by particular body, as long as it is a cultural competency. Am I not interpreting this correctly?
Well, it's wonderful that you remember these things, because so often things get confused. It was several years ago, the legislature had a bill that said if boards, and yours was one of them, wanted to, they could elect to include cultural competency requirements from the same mechanism, the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And at the time, the board was interested in the concept, but the cart was before the horse. The Office of Equity and Inclusion had not approved, I think at the time they had approved 2 classes. And at the time, the board said requiring the dietitians to take courses when there just aren't that many courses on offer. So you took a pass on it at the time. The legislature came back and removed the option from the boards in 2020, I think it was, or 2021, where they said, you can't opt to take these courses. It is required. So that's why you have a separate rule apart from the requirements that the board has within your licensed dietitian statutes. You have this separate kind of side piece requirement. Now, your national certification, those CEUs can roll, but the every other year requirement of cultural competency through Office of Equity and Inclusion classes, every other time you renew, is a separate requirement.
And is it possible for us to put some sort of educational one-pager to the licensees? Because I think if us here on the board are not clear about it, this is going to be chaos of administrative, especially on the audits. It's going to be a mess. So, and make sure they have compliance and people are very clear that national renew the stuff we need for our RDNs, it gets roll over, but these are independent of anything else, and we need to get them only from these sources. End of story, period. This is Oregon special thing.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and I will get on that right away.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the continuing education? We're not going to call it a conundrum, but it would sound good if we did.
Thank you so much, and for explaining. Really appreciate your clarity. Thank you.
No, and thank you for helping me understand the lens that dietitians have, because when we're soaked in this every day and it makes sense to us, sometimes it's incredibly helpful to have somebody on the outside go, you know, maybe that doesn't seem as clear to people who don't sit in it every day. So thank you so much for that. The other piece is we did have another piece of legislation. Hopefully, well, you know, I'm just going to say it. I think it's going to be confusing for folks. So we're going to have to do a lot of communication on this too. I included a statute or a bill that went through that I included. I hope everybody got a chance to see it. Russ, did you get your packet so you can follow along? Are you there, Russ?
I don't know, am I?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Did you get the email with the materials?
Let me check.
Okay, about 2/3 of the way through, we should be looking at House Bill 2359. While Russ checks, has everyone had a chance to kind of glance through that?
Mm-hmm.
I do not have it. It's blame Comcast, huh?
Oh, okay. Well,
Check your junk email, Russ.
yeah, sometimes that happens. Okay, while Russ look, oh, is it there?
No. Let me try a different one.
Okay. Well, while Russ looks,
two computers here.
Okay. House Bill 2359 went through on the 2021 session. And what it essentially did, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, there is a registry that the Oregon Health Authority maintains of interpreters who can serve in healthcare settings for patients whose English is not their first language. And there's been some concern over time that interpreters were not of sufficient quality to be of service to patients who really needed something explained to them in their language of choice. And so what this bill did was kind of tighten the registry and address healthcare providers specifically who may use, interpreters, and say that a healthcare provider as of July 2022 must use an interpreter from this registry maintained by the Oregon Health Authority when dealing with patients who do not speak English primarily. There is an out, there's a caveat there saying, if the healthcare provider is fluent in the patient's language, they don't have to use an interpreter, or if they've made every attempt and the patient doesn't want an interpreter from that registry. I mean, there's some exceptions, right? The piece that dietitians are called out specifically about this registry, and in addition to the other professionals, what's really interesting is little g in the list, section 6, little g, where it says any other person that provides healthcare or that bills for or is compensated for healthcare provided in the normal course of business. Now that seems like a little catch-all, but what that does is take the scope of this requirement and explode it. Mm-hmm. Anyone who provides healthcare services, that could be athletic trainers, that could be, there's a lot of people who could meet that requirement. But dietitians are called out specifically. And some of our other boards, midwives, respiratory therapy, and polysomnography, the sleep techs. So what we're doing, because we would normally put that requirement in your rules because you're called out specifically. But because of more than one board and that enormous explosion that comes from that little extra section, we're planning, I'm working on it now, putting a rule in the HLO rules, which are the overarching rules that cover all of our now 18 boards and programs. It's going to have to be very generic because it has to apply to everyone. And we're going to be pointing people in our communications to the registry. Now, OHA is still working on that piece. And because we're a little bit more nimble, our rule might go into place before their structure is complete, which is a little awkward, but we want to be sure we meet the deadline. So in the coming weeks, licensees of the noted boards, of which you're one, and everyone we think might be affected by this is going to get a communication about this rule. Is it going to be kind of confusing because it's going to have to be really general to cover all of these things. So we're hoping through communications, we can help people understand if you need to use an interpreter to deal with your patients, you need to go to this registry. And as that gets up and rolling, hopefully we can do hot links on letters and things like that. But for right now, we're just going to have a generic rule in place that kind of just reiterates this statute. Does that make sense to everyone?
A question. That will be, is there, I did not read, of course, the whole thing yet. Is there a provision as far as the insurance coverage for this, using these people out of the register? So providers, is it like simple way to, do you know of, for providers to bill for the interpreting service?
That's a great question. There's nothing in the statute that talks about billing. It does say that if the interpreter needs personal protection equipment, PPE, that must be provided to the interpreter at no cost. But it doesn't talk about the insurance component because unfortunately we kind of are in the doing the work, but how it gets compensated is generally out of our purview. But it is a good question. And as the, what would be interesting, if you could keep an eye on the OHA registry page, they might have some additional information there, but the statute doesn't really address anything other than no cost personal protection equipment.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
Of course. Of course. So look for that in the coming weeks. Again, this is kind of brand new. We were hoping to get to it sooner, but there was a bill in the short session that talked about the creation. Once again, it would have come to us, and it's come up before. They Sign Language Interpreters Board, and we were waiting to see how that worked through the session before we took a move on this, because if a patient's preferred language is American Sign Language, well, how would that work together when you have a board and then you have the separate registry? So we were waiting for the smoke to clear on that before we took a step in this direction, knowing this is now what we have to do. Is that hopefully clear? We're really going to work on our communications with folks and try to keep things simple and try to help people understand that, you know, our cart may be built and sitting there before the horse is ready, so to speak, but that's just the way these things roll out sometimes. Does anybody have any more questions?
This is Gillingham. I guess I would just say, and maybe this is already part of the plan, but when you do send out the communication, making it clear to whoever's receiving it that it does affect like your profession. Because I think sometimes when I got communication recently about this, and I thought it had nothing to do with me, to be honest, because I was like, oh, it's healthcare interpreters, you know. So maybe just making it clear that it does affect like that person, that profession.
Absolutely. What we try to do, and we think these things through, because as we just saw with Yulia, often outside input is incredibly helpful in helping us craft our messages. And we try to be as direct as possible. It's very hard when you get an email from the government that starts out with 200 years ago, America was formed. And, you know, we try to make things as direct as possible. So what I'm hoping to do is some very customized messages for the boards that are specifically called out, and then maybe have a brainstorming session with our leadership about okay, what of our other professions could realistically be impacted by this, and then come up with a separate message for, hey, this might apply to you. You know, so we have the direct and then we have the indirect application of this, and hopefully we can customize messages to get to the point you addressed. Anybody else? I know the legislation, keeping it all woven together and integrated it is not easy sometimes. So if there's nothing else, Sylvie or Bob, is there anything from policy you need from me?
Nope, you did good.
Okay,
All good here.
Okay, muting out.
All right. So we're on the agenda on item number 4. Bob, is there anybody on the phone line?
There is not.
There is not. We will move on. Item number 5, other board business. Does anybody have any other board business? That would be a negative. Okay. Yulia, you have a closing script. Once you read the closing script, we'll all hold on here until Nathan stops the recording, and then we can talk. But go ahead and read it.
Thank you guys all for being here. The Board of Licensed Dietitian meeting is adjourned at 9:41 a.m. on Wednesday, April 20th, 2022.